That's quite a feat. A pleasure, though. Well, I sort of was classically trained, I guess you'd say, in fiction writing. I went to Stanford, to the Stanford writing program. And so I was very serious about writing serious fiction. And through a series of events, I worked in advertising for a while. I came out here when my friend Dan Wakefield was involved with a show called James at 16, if you remember that. But that kind of brought me back to California from the East Coast. And I got a job at Fox, and I was writing episodic. And then I met my husband, Douglas, there on the Fox lot. He wasn't working there, but he was friends with the guy who introduced us on a blind date. And so then I settled here. But during the writer's strike of 1988 is when I went back to fiction. And when I wrote North of Montana, totally on spec, and it took 5 years to do it. At the same time that I was writing for TV and raising kids. And I didn't tell anybody I was writing it. You know, and I know that's a question that's going to come up for both of us, which is, okay, so how did you move from technical writing, scientific writing to fiction, you know?
Yeah, well, my wife and I had a unique deal where we had been married a couple of years, and she had been looking for a different career path and decided she wanted to go to med school. So we made a deal where she was an English major, by the way, in college, so she had taken no pre-med courses, but it's good for me now because she edits all my books.
Yeah, that's helpful.
But she had never taken any pre-med courses, so we had an agreement that I would work and support her through 9 years of pre-med, med school, and residency, and when she was done and a full-fledged physician, I would get to quit my job and get 9 years to try to get published.
Wow.
And did it in 5 years. So I have 4 years that I can set aside if things, you know, the bottom falls out. I have 4 more years where I can just hang out. And I don't think she'd let me get away with that, but yeah. So
did you renegotiate or?
Yeah. Now she wants it to give me 9 years to get her to quit her job. We'll see if that happens. But yeah, I had always enjoyed thrillers. I've been a huge thriller fan since, you know, Raise the Titanic was really the book that got me interested in thrillers. But it never occurred to me that I could actually write them.
Right.
You know, when I was in high school, it was my father was an engineer, my brother was an engineer. It was kind of, okay, what kind of engineer are you going to be?
Yeah.
And so I went to college and thought, okay, well, that's going to be my career. But as I got through it, I started writing and thought, oh, maybe I could try this someday as a career. And luckily I had a spouse who was very supportive of that.
Right. Well, I think sort of having a scientific mind, you know, or sort of logic helps a lot in writing these thrillers. You know, I went to Bronx Science, and in fact my alumnus here, Mark Grant from Science in the Bronx, and of course I was, you know, absolutely terrible in math. But there's something about the logic and precision of plotting out a thriller that I think it helps you to have that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think
especially in what you do with all these.
Yeah, trying to make sure that I get rid of all the plot holes, and I have friends and family who help find those. But you know, when you do your research, do you talk to FBI agents?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, my stuff is very research-based and reality-based. North of Montana was published in '94, and when I sort of segued off of Cagney and Lacey, and well, no, actually, that was a decade before. What the hell? You know, there's decades. Anyway, the point was that I started establishing relationships with the FBI in '94, which have continued to this day. And in fact, this TNT show that I'm executive producing and that I wrote, we have a technical advisor named Supervisory Special Agent Pam Graham, who's helped me with my books since Good Morning Killer. You know, so we have a very long-term relationship, and she has opened the door at the Bureau for me to get to know dozens of agents, and also I've had the privilege of being part of their training exercises, and even they did a whole scenario in Long Beach, California. It was one of these disaster scenarios that was a multi-agency experience, and actually it was national, and it was really fascinating because they actually had a script. There are companies that create these games, sort of, you know, and that's a story for law enforcement. But of course the players, you know, the people from LAPD and the fire department and the radioactive guy, you know, whatever they are, hazmat guys, they didn't know what the story was, but next to, in the room, literally next door in this naval station, were the guys on computers feeding them clues, as it were.
Really?
Yeah, and it was national, and there were people in Washington, D.C. and New York who were getting, for example, they'd say, okay, there's a train leaving Chicago, and we just found out it's loaded with, you know, nuclear warheads. And then, so Chicago would, like, put that on the computer, and then someone in New York would say, well, we just found out there's a terrorist attack, you know, in the subway. And the job was to act in real time to figure it out. And they had names, they had to deal with all these foreign names and stuff. So I was there, you know, watching that. And having the visceral experience of that kind of adrenaline and pressure, because it felt very, very real. And they had video. They had pre-recorded, this company did. And when I walked in, I thought it was real because they had these big screens in it, and they were, you know, firemen. They had like dead bodies and people recovering the bodies. It was really pretty elaborate.